Welcome. If you're new with us today, we particularly welcome you. We're working our way through the whole Bible, and we're down to the last 11 chapters. 11 chapters remaining in the book of Revelation. There are 22 in all, so we're exactly halfway through John's Revelation. We're going verse by verse and chapter by chapter. Some of you are already asking, what are we going to do when we get through? I've been talking with our ministers of adult Christian education about some possibilities, and we're going to prepare a ballot for you when we get a little bit closer to the end, and let you help us decide what you would most rather do when we finish this study. We'll give you several options and let you fill them out, and we'll try to go where the majority would like to go best we can. So I'll give you much more information about that when we get right near the end of our study. What we've been doing all the way through the Bible this time is using a scholar who's written a commentary within the last 10 years. We've used all kinds of scholars as long as they are from seminaries accredited by the United Methodist Church. And that doesn't mean only our 13 seminaries, of course, but we accredit a number of others, Harvard and Yale and Princeton and so on. But there are a number of Lutheran and Episcopalian and Roman Catholic seminaries and so on that we enthusiastically endorse the work that they do. So we've had Catholic scholars and Episcopal scholars and Lutheran scholars and disciple scholars and so on, as you know. A different one for each of the books as we've gone along, except when we had some of those little short letters, and then occasionally we'd have a scholar that had written on 2 or 3 of them. So this time we're using Dr. Leonard Thompson, who's a very capable scholar, and he's helping us go through the book of Revelation. I read the whole commentary last spring, highlighted the parts that I thought would be most helpful to you in understanding every verse of every chapter, as much as we can know about what was in John's mind 2,000 years after he wrote these words from a cave on a little island about 62 miles off the coast of what is modern-day Turkey. So in the Adriatic Sea, a part of the Mediterranean, of course, Patmos is about 100 kilometers or about 62 miles off the coast of what was a very prominent port city in biblical times, Ephesus. I told you that Ephesus later had a malarial outbreak. So many people died that the city itself was abandoned. And in time, the river meandered, silted up anyway, and it was no longer an effective port. Today, if one goes by cruise ship to Ephesus, you go to Kusadasi, Turkey. That's where the ships land, and then it's about a 40-minute bus ride or so from there, or taxi if you want to spend more money. You can get to the ruins at Ephesus. All right? Let's pray before we get underway. God, we always seek your guidance and direction if we want to understand your book as well as we ought. Because even those passages we think are very simple can be very complex. There can be meanings there that we do not quite grasp on first reading, because our English words do not always translate as fully from the Greek or Hebrew as they might, or as we wish they would. All languages have words that are not easily definable into some other language. So we count on you to help us. We count on good scholars to help us. And we want to know what's in this book of yours, those things that are forever true about you and about us. We offer our prayer in Christ's name. Amen. All right, chapter 12, that's where we are. Just a couple of sentences from Dr. Thompson, and then we'll start reading. He prefaces chapter 12 with these sentences. Somewhere in the heavens, a pregnant woman gives birth successfully to a royal Messiah in spite of a threatening dragon. Now, let me remind you that ancient folks thought they were surrounded by water. And the bigger the body of water, for biblical writers, that was the Mediterranean Sea. When they would see huge dorsal fins and so on, they imagined that there were even bigger monsters out there that they had never seen. In addition, we know that old reptiles had just been around almost forever. And where nuclear tests were conducted above ground back in World War II and immediately following times, they discovered that any kind of nuclear weapon killed every mammal within miles and miles. But when they got to these sites, they found old reptiles, lizards and things, turtles still crawling around, amphibians. Dr. Carl Sagan, in his book, The Dragons of Eden, says that we've always been apprehensive about reptiles. What was it that the writer used to tempt Adam and Eve? A talking snake. And so he called his book The Dragons of Eden, how we deal with the reptiles. And he went a step farther in his book to say that he was convinced that the latter development of our brains made that part which really distinguishes us from the reptiles, and that within mammals we still have vestiges of the old reptilian brain. And the reptilian brain, he believed, was the part that caused us to strike out and kill. And he even told some stories, like the young man who climbed up in the tower at the University of Texas and shot 22 people some years ago. An Eagle Scout, a Sunday school teacher, a beloved son, husband and father, who just started killing people that morning. And when they autopsied him, they discovered they had a tumor on his brain that no one knew about, and it was pressing on that part of the brain which Sagan called the reptilian part of the brain, and the old reptile came out again. You can go with that as far or as briefly as you like, but for sure, in writings of ancient folks, reptiles and these dragons, some vestige, you see, of that long ago memory when there were bigger, more violent things around, gets swept up into the stories as well. So, we're going to read about a pregnant woman who's going to birth a Messiah, but there's a threatening dragon there as well. And so there's an archangel, Michael, and his angels pursue this dragon. The dragon is thrown down to the earth, and in response, heaven rejoices. But the fact that he was thrown down to the earth means that more woes come to the earth. Let's read chapter 12. A great portent appeared in heaven. A woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pangs in the agony of giving birth. Okay, Dr. Thompson. The pregnant woman is more than pregnant woman. The dragon, more than dragon for John. The woman is located in the center of the sun, moon, and 12 stars. She controls them. She is revealed here as some kind of celestial goddess. I am she that riseth in the dog star. I divided the earth from the heaven. I showed the paths of the stars. I ordered the course of the sun and the moon. I'm in the rays of the sun. I inspect the courses of the sun. Her crown of 12 stars probably represents those stars of the zodiac, sad to say. Though dressed as a celestial goddess, her sole purpose in Revelation 12 is to give birth. Birth pangs and birthing are images of transformation in all of the Bible. And there are many references, Isaiah 7, Isaiah 26, Isaiah 66, Micah 4, and in the writings of Paul, 1 Thessalonians 5, and so on. We're in the throes of birth pangs. The whole universe is in the throes of birth pangs. Wonderful things happen when birth finally occurs, but getting there is painful. Let's go on with verse 3. Then another portent appeared in heaven, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 diadems on his heads. His tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. Then the dragon stood before the woman who was about to bear a child, so that he might devour her child as soon as it was born. And if you've studied mythology, Greek and Roman and others, you will see that there are all kinds of similar figures used in those dramas as well. But let's see what Dr. Thompson says. The woman's antagonist is a great fiery red dragon. given emphasis by the word behold. He is the most powerful opponent of God in John's revelation, with origins in those chaotic forces that opposed God at creation, that opposed God in Noah's flood. The great waters underneath rising even as the waters fell from overhead. Dragons usually are thought to have many heads. This one has 7. Each head supports a diadem, a crown indicating some kind of royal power, just as the goddess has a crown of 12 stars symbolizes her power. He also has 10 horns, which means he's really powerful. The dragon must be located below the stars in order to pull them down with his tail. He stands before the woman, waiting for her to give birth so that he can devour her child. Let's go on, verse 5. And she gave birth to a son, a male child, who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was snatched away and taken to God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, so that there she can be nourished for 1,260 days. Okay? So, the woman bears a male child identified as the royal Messiah by means of the image of the iron rod. The dragon is not able to destroy this child, for he's snatched away to the throne of God. And the woman flees into the desert, wilderness. Those are interchangeable words in Greek and Hebrew here. It's a place of drought, famine, demonic powers, dangerous animals, akin to chaos prior to creation. On the other hand, it was in the desert that Moses and those who followed him came to salvation, deliverance, and redemption. For the mother here in Revelation 12, the wilderness is a sanctuary. It's a place prepared for her by God, where she dwells for 1,260 days. And we dealt with the 1,260 days last week. It comes out of the Old Testament scriptures. Michael and the dragon engage in battle, each with a troop of angels. Michael is victorious. Remember, he slays the dragon, and there is no longer any place in heaven for the dragon and his angels. The dragon is then identified in full. He is the ancient serpent, the devil, the liar. Both devil and Satan are terms for the adversary who deceives. So let's read that in verses 7 and following. Okay? And war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. The dragon and his angels fought back. But they were defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. The great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil, the Satan, the deceiver. And Dr. Brandon Scott told you the root word means the liar. The liar who lied first to Adam and Eve, who lied to Jesus after he had been baptized and was tempted in the desert, you remember. He is thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And then I heard a loud voice in heaven proclaiming, "Now have come the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Messiah. For the accuser of our comrades has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God. But they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they did not cling to life even in the face of death. Rejoice then, you heavens, and those who dwell in them. But woe to the earth and the sea, for this liar, devil, has come down to you with great wrath, because he knows his time is short." So John is still believing we may have some really tough times immediately ahead, but in time things are going to get much better. So here again in verses 10, 11, 12, a loud voice then acclaims God and his Messiah. The accuser of our comrades has been thrown down. The comrades conquer Satan by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. And the acclamation ends with Satan, the devil, being cast out of heaven down to earth. The Satan is angry that he has only a short time to do what he wants to do to the people on earth. Let's go on with verse 13. So when the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. But the woman was given the 2 wings of the great eagle, so that she could fly from the serpent into the wilderness, to her place where she is nourished for a time, and times, and half a time. Then from his mouth the serpent poured water like a river after the woman, to sweep her away with the flood. But the earth came to the help of the woman. It opened its mouth and swallowed the river that the dragon had poured from his mouth. Then the dragon was angry with the woman and went off to make war on the rest of her children, those who keep the commandments of God and hold the testimony of Jesus. Okay? So the dragon chase continues. The woman has already given birth. She flies by the wings of an eagle to her place in the desert. This is movement patterned after Israel's exodus to Mount Sinai in the desert. Remember in Exodus it says, "You've seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself." Exodus chapter 19. Water supports the dragon. Earth is friendly to the mother. Remember, Jews were not seagoing people, and they didn't trust those big monster-like things that lived out there in the water. They preferred desert to ocean. It was in the desert that they felt closest to God. They could function out there, if you would. Remember, even Elijah, when he had defeated the prophets of Baal, had cut off their heads and their blood had flowed down Mount Carmel into the Jezreel River. That the king and queen saw this, old Jezebel, and said, "Well, your blood will flow in the streets, Elijah, and the dogs will lick it." Where did he go? To the desert. He ran 150 miles from Mount Carmel, which is way up near Haifa, all the way down into the Sinai desert. The Jews felt safer in the desert. They could get away from their enemies, if you would. Okay, let's go a little bit farther. The angry dragon wars not with the male child, whose birth is described earlier. This male child, the Messiah, the dragon stands no chance against him, so he'll take out his warfare with the rest of her children, if you would. Now the 2 portents here, a pregnant woman and a great red dragon, portray the birth of the hero, in this case the Messiah. The mother cries out in agony while an antagonist seeks to destroy the child soon to be born. Here in Revelation, he is born and immediately ascends into heaven. The mother also disappears, fleeing into the desert to a place prepared for her by God. So both mother and child are relatively passive. It's God who's acting on their behalf. Then a battle with the dragon follows, but one initiated by the archangel Michael, not the Messiah who's been birthed. Michael is victorious, and dragon, Satan, cast out of heaven down to earth, and the male child reigns with God. So evil comes into being as an act of rebellion against God. God, who is the creator of all things. And John's reminded us of that in chapter 4 of his Revelation. God created things and they were wonderful, but something has come that's disturbed God's creation. The dragon was angry with the woman and went off to make war on the rest of her children, those who keep the commandments of God and hold the testimony of Jesus. So in short, this series of visions describes the Christian situation as John envisions it. The evil that they face, how that evil insinuates itself into society and culture, and how Christians are to conquer it. Okay, any problems? Okay, let me just stop and say, there's enough language here, you see, that those who want to distort and, move it into the 21st century and start assigning political powers or economic powers from oil to OPEC to Soviet Union a few years ago, Russia today, Chavez and Venezuela, and pick somebody. They do. They pick people all around the world and say John knew all about them. But really, John is describing his own situation. This is the way he sees it. God has birthed his Messiah after all these centuries, and it's changed everything. This Messiah now is at the very right hand of God. But there are others of us still living, and we're still having difficulties, John is saying, in his own time. So even though the Satan has no power in the heavens, God has defeated that power as to ultimacy. It will never be an ultimate kind of power ever again, but it still gives us trouble down here. We still have strife. We still have hurt and pain we visit upon ourselves and upon each other. He's describing this in language that was very familiar to people who knew Greek mythology and Roman mythology and Old Testament work, you see. But we believe, when I say we, trust these seminaries that have been in existence for hundreds of years, literally hundreds of years, not only in the United States, but in Western Europe as well. And the mainline scholars, again, Roman Catholic, Episcopalian, Presbyterian, Lutheran, United Methodist, disciples, we all see this book almost identically. These are general references, not specifics. You're going to have difficulty for a time. Things are going to get better. The outcome is assured. God is in His heaven. All's right with the world. The Messiah has been birthed. What needed to be done has been done. Those who wash their robes in the blood of the Lamb are white, spotless, and will one day be received also into the very presence of God, and so on. John's on an island, a tiny little island. He knows nothing about the 21st century. Nothing. And the role of prophecy in the Bible is not to project hundreds of years. The only way you can get that out of prophecy in the Bible, again, is to hold that Daniel was written to predict what would happen the next 400 years, and it happened. But our best scholars, if you were to go ask Rabbi Sherman, Rabbi Fitzerman, or out to Phillips Theological Seminary here, or our Methodist seminaries in Kansas City or Dallas or these other places, what they believe about Daniel, they will all tell you. And the rabbis' community produced that book. It wasn't written at the time of the Babylonian captivity, and Daniel knew exactly what was going to happen the next 400 years. The language, the vocabulary, everything points to its having been written after the 400 years, reflecting back. Reflecting backward. You see the difference? As to how we understand it to have been written. And it does make a difference. Today, in the next few weeks, our lectionary takes us to the pastoral epistles, they're called. Down through the centuries, we've called these three letters the pastoral epistles. You and I went through them, but if you've forgotten, let me just remind you. First letter to Timothy, second letter to Timothy, the letter to Titus. Scholars today are convinced Paul didn't write any one of the three, and he didn't write them to Timothy or Titus. And there are lots of good reasons why we are convinced that is so. In preparation for today's sermon, I read great scholars from different parts of Christendom, but all of whom have gone to the really great seminaries. I mean, a woman scholar, Dr. Joette Bassler, who held a distinguished position at Perkins School of Theology, SMU, for years. Or Dr. Hans Konzelman, one of the great German theologians. Dr. James Dunn, one of the great English-Scottish theologians. Baim, Feine, Kummel, three great German theologians who write, and all six of them said, Paul didn't write these epistles. And they weren't written to Timothy and Titus. All three are written at least a generation later, somewhere between 95 and 110. Late 1st century, early 2nd century of the Common Era. The conditions being described are not conditions of Paul's time in the 50s and 60s. The church was not there yet. It took 40 more years to get to the point these letters address and so on. Okay? Now what I'm saying to you is that our best scholars of the mainline branches of Christianity, not the Johnny-come-latelys here, folks that have been around for centuries, see these things the same, virtually so, the same. And so if you start reading these books that scare the thunder out of you, look carefully who's writing. And they are coming from religious bodies and seminaries not accredited by your United Methodist Church. Okay? A few months ago, Gail decided finally to do with some coins that her dad had collected all these years. Now, not the kind that are uncirculated in fancy little holders and stuff. Her dad just went through his pocket change, and he saved coins that he thought might be of some value for one reason or another. And all these years after his death, now Gail was ready to deal with that little bag of coins. So where do you go? Where do you go with them? Well, what I did was to call one of the jewelers in our church, whom I have great confidence in. I trust this person. He works for one of the best-known jewelers in Tulsa and has for many years. And I called him, and he said, "We don't do that, but let me tell you who we use." And he told me about a young woman. There are two men that work with her as well, but he particularly liked the way she does things. They're only a few blocks from this church. I had no idea they were there. They are registered gymnologists and coin appraisers and so on. And so I told Gail, and late one afternoon we had an appointment to take them over, and she looked at them, and she had her little books and things there, and she said, "Well, this dime is worth 10 cents, and this quarter's worth 25, and this half dollar's worth 50, but this one's worth a little more, and this one a little more, and this one a little more, and this one a little more," and so on. When we walked away, we felt we had the truth about these coins. This was a reputable, highly skilled, highly trained person. And someone whom we knew and trusted had sent us to her. We felt good about that. So why do Christian people, when they're dealing with matters of life and death and eternal salvation, turn to folks who have no credentials at all? And read books that scare the thunder out of them. People that can take these little signs and symbols and weave them together in all kinds of strange, distorted ways and seemingly make sense. Don't buy your Rolex watches from guys on the street with the trench coats. If you get a Rolex for $17.95, it probably isn't a Rolex. Okay? So anyway, you have to decide who you trust. Who do you trust? And again, I've said there are people that say, "Well, I believe as long as you're sincere." And I say, really? Do you go for your medical needs to somebody who's sincere, who drips chicken blood on you and, makes little funny noises while they do it? Not me. I want to see where this person went to medical school. I read around the walls. Where did this person go to medical school? Where did he or she intern? And so on. Are they certified to do what they're doing to me? I want to know. I don't trust anybody who wears a rubber glove. Okay? I want to know where this person went to school. So when we get to important things like the Word of God, why don't we turn to the people who've been doing this for a long time, and do not believe the people who are trying to scare you to death, because their first salvo is, well, you can't trust those people, they're deceiving you. We are not deceiving you. Our best schools are not deceiving you, and they want to help you understand. There just isn't nearly as much here as some people would like for you to believe. There's an overall impression, an overall look at how things are about to happen very soon, John says, but nothing about 2009, except the things that are forever true about God and about us. Okay, I'm going to make you that speech several more times before we get through with Revelation, because I want you to walk away from here after we finish chapter 22 believing that you've had the benefit of the best scholarship that I could find for you. Okay, let's go into 13. Just a couple of sentences before we read. Chapter 13 consists of two visions, one of a great sea beast, first 10 verses, and the other of a great beast on the earth, when you go on 11 through 18. As the dragon empowers the sea beast, and the sea beast empowers the earth beast. They are the very epitomes of evil. They blaspheme, they entice worship, they deceive with signs, And notice this one, and tattoo their devotees. Remember, tattooing was not allowed in Judaism. Therefore the saints must be watchful, faithful, and ready to endure captivity and death. Right? Chapter 13. Then the dragon took his stand on the sand of the seashore, and I saw a beast rising out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads, and on its horns were 10 diadems, and on its heads were blasphemous names. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard, its feet like a bear's, its mouth like a lion's mouth. And the dragon gave it his power and his throne and great authority. And here again you can see that Russia was a bear and so on. And that's where Hal Lindsey went off and running in the 1970s when we were frightened to death of this huge enemy, the Soviet Union. And so you can see why he sold a lot of books and made a lot of money. If you take these animals and assume that John knew something about politics 2,100 years later, well, then you follow Hal Lindsey. He's now a very old man who sits around at night and counts his money. As the dragon stands on the shore, a great beast is seen rising up from the sea. The sea is an image of the abyss of chaos again. Jews weren't water-going people, sea-going people, over which God had to be victorious in order to create an ordered world. The sea beast has its diadems, crowns, symbols of royal power on its horns, not its head, and blasphemous names on its heads, either contemptuous names for God or names claiming divinity for the beast. Leopard, bear, and lion may allude to the same kingdoms in Daniel chapter 7, but they are common names for monstrous, dangerous animals of ancient people. Horses are associated with war, and the other 3 animals here with what's dangerous and monstrous. The dragon transfers his power to the sea beast so that he can make war on the rest of the woman's children. Verse 3. One of its heads seemed to have received a death blow, but its mortal wound had been healed. In amazement, the whole earth followed the beast. They worshipped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast? Who can fight against it?" So, one of the beast's heads appears as slain. The New Revised Standard Version says, seems to have received a death blow. The sea beast recovery causes people to worship both the dragon and the beast rather than the one true God. And finally, after the transfer of authority to the beast, the dragon recedes into the background to let these new empowered forces of his work in the world. Verse 5, the beast was given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. Same period of time we've been talking about forever here. It opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. Also, it was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. It was given authority over every tribe and people and language and nation, and all the inhabitants of the earth will worship it, everyone whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb that was slaughtered. Okay? A little bit more help here from Dr. Thompson. These verses recount what was given to the sea beast. He is allowed to blaspheme. Now, to blaspheme is to speak contemptuously against God. The unpardonable sin that's mentioned in the Bible is blasphemy. And the word that's translated there is a word that means a person who has said no to God, no to anything that God has done, so many times that he or she cannot see a way to say yes to God. who has said know that there is a God, know that God is at work in the world, who sees even good things happening and is unwilling to give God any praise whatsoever, doesn't believe God is involved, and has said it and lived it so long that he or she simply cannot find it within himself or herself to respond in a positive way. Okay, he is allowed authority for 42 months, same length of time the woman is being nourished in the desert. That the two witnesses have authority to perform their wonders and powers, and that the nations trample the holy city. The sea beast also is allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. In contrast to the holy ones of God, the inhabitants of the earth worship the dragon and the sea beast. Remember that by the time John writes, the second temple in Jerusalem has been destroyed by the Romans in 70. We think John's writing in the mid-90s. So the bad folks have trampled again the holy city of God, and the only temple that survives now is the eternal one in the kingdom of God. Verse 9, let anyone who has an ear listen. If you are to be taken captive, into captivity you go. If you kill with the sword you must be killed. Here is a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. In other words, don't be like them. If you live by the sword, you die by the sword. Just a couple things from Dr. Thompson. Listen, he says. The second proverb plays on the killed by a sword. That is, if anyone is to be killed by a sword, he is killed by a sword. But the final statement calls the saints to endurance and faith. The admonition seems to be to endure in faith rather than fight with the sword. Verse 11, then I saw another beast that rose out of the earth. It had two horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. It exercises all the authority of the first beast on its behalf, and it makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast whose mortal wound had been healed. Okay, Dr. Thompson says, then I saw, marks a new vision that calls attention to a second beast rising from the earth. In Jewish lore, there were two primordial beasts, one associated with the water and one associated with the earth. In 2nd Esdras, or in Job, chapter 40 and 41, you get some references to this. Let me read a few sentences from 2nd Esdras. Then you kept in existence two living creatures, the one you call Behemoth, that was the land-based one, and the name of the other Leviathan, the one in the ocean. And you gave Behemoth one of the parts that had been dried up on the third day to live in it, where there are 1,000 mountains. But to Leviathan you gave the seventh part, the watery part. So John's picking up on that kind of imagery. So the earth beast exercises the authority of both the dragon and the sea beast, and it has two horns like a lamb. The earth beast also has authority to make the inhabitants of the earth worship the sea beast, who is here again described as having been healed from some kind of deadly blow. Let's go on with verse 13. It performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in the sight of all. And by the signs that it is allowed to perform on behalf of the beast, it deceives the inhabitants of earth, telling them to make an image for the beast that had been wounded by the sword and yet lived. And it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast could even speak and cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. Okay, and he says, the earth beast deceives by performing great signs, even making fire come down from heaven. The wound of the sea beast is described here as the one who receives the blow of a sword and still lives. Verse 16, also it causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell who does not have the mark, that is, the name of the beast or the number of its name. Thompson says, after the living image kill those who would not worship it. The remainder are tattooed on either their right hand or their forehead. Now this word, charagma in Greek, is an imprint such as a serpent's mark, a brand on a camel, or the impression made on a coin. It's used in all of those ways in classical Greek. So it's the counterpart to the seal of God. So both the tattoo and the seal mark the body to indicate membership in a community. Here the tattoo was of either the name, the name of the sea beast or the number equivalent of that name. So having the tattoo had practical implications, for without it no one could buy or sell. That is, the sea beast controlled all commerce and trade. Now, we stop here and see that John, living on an island, so he knows some of what's going on, at least on the Mediterranean, and those who are being allowed to trade freely and do commerce within the Roman Empire, and those who are having a more difficult time. And it's often those who've sold out to paganism, to heathenism, who are allowed to do business, and those who are marked with the sign of baptism, circumcision for Jews, baptism for Gentile Christians, who are being excluded from making a living from commerce, etc. Verse 18, this calls for wisdom. Let anyone with understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a person. Its number is 666. Did you read about the plane hijacking down at Cancun this week? The plane was hijacked en route to Mexico City. Did you hear what the hijacker said? He had to deliver a message to the President of Mexico. Did you notice what day it was? It was the 9th day of the 9th month of the 9th year. And this fellow said, what you need to do is turn 9s upside down, and you get 666. And he had to go tell the President of Mexico that this was the day of the beast. And he put it in danger. Many lives of people because he was an idiot. But there are enough people who play games with the numbers. Let me explain to you again what this is all about, and then we'll let Dr. Thompson remind you as well. This was a kind of very primitive code. Very primitive code all those 2,000 years ago. You could take an alphabet. You want to do the Roman, you want to do the Greek, you want to do the Hebrew. Pick one, take an alphabet, and assign to each of the letters a number. And then if you came up with the right number assigned to the right letters, you would have the name. So, of course, that makes it possible to spell out almost anything. 1960, John F. Kennedy was running for president, a Roman Catholic. There were people who sang, if this man gets elected, the next week the Pope will move from Rome to New York and the Catholics will take over the world. It was in the newspapers. Finally, he tried to address that in Houston, Texas. So we were in Texas, and we got more of that news coverage than others when he was trying to address that. But there were people who assigned different numbers to different letters of the alphabet and came up with John F. Kennedy is 666, mark of the beast. But there were others who applied different numbers to different letters and came up with Joseph Stalin, Adolf Hitler. Pick a bad person. If you play that game, there are enough numbers and enough letters, you can spell most anything. Now the question is not, who does Hal Lindsey think it's spelled? The question is, who did John think it's spelled? Who is John talking about here? That's what you and I want to know. Okay, Dr. Thompson. The number of the beast, 666, is a human number. Now, since each Greek letter also represented a number, 666 was the sum of the numeric equivalent in the letters of a name. Many names have been calculated to have the sum of 666. But in John's time, it fits perfectly with the Emperor Nero. In one ancient writing, Jesus has the sum 888. So people played games with numbers. Right? A little recap here of chapter 13. In this chapter, John describes the character and activity of evil that Christians were facing. Each of those beasts had its own history, but the Lord God overcame both of them, sea and dry land, in order to establish an ordered, stable world. They will not be overcome completely until the last days, these two beasts. We keep asking, Dr. Tankersley in his prayer this morning says, how much longer, Lord, do we have all the mistrust and the shouting and the hurting that we do to each other? Well, the sea beast and the land beast are going to be around till we get to the end. To the end. They are dangerous to all earthlings, especially the holy ones of God, for they appear to be divine powers and thereby are very capable of deceiving. The sea beast has divine names written on its 7 heads. Like the lamb, it appears as slain. It died and came back to life like Jesus Christ. And here John is trying to say that, in fact, there is no power on this earth that has not received a death blow in the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus. He's trying to affirm that. Even death we no longer have to fear, he's saying. And yet, it still hurts. Death still hurts. People are still sick. People are still warring on each other. He still imagines that there's a power out there that's going to be more powerful and take on the Romans. And if they fight each other, then once again they're going to destroy our olive groves and our vineyards and our wheat fields, and prices will go up. So on the one hand, this beast had received a mortal blow with the death and resurrection of Jesus. But guess what? It's still alive. You see, that's what he's really trying to say. He knows nothing about OPEC or oil. Nothing. Knows nothing about a Soviet bear. Nothing of Lenin, nothing of Stalin, nothing of Putin. Pick one. He knows nothing of them. Nothing. But it's Holy Writ for us because he's saying, we thought evil was done away, and in fact, it never will be victorious. In fact, it's been thrown down to the earth and still exercises some power here, even though it's received a mortal blow. It'll be around, I'm afraid, both in the sea and on the dry land. And I mentioned last week in the reading from Hebrews, from which I preached, that author was quoting from Haggai. And yet once in a little while, I will shake the sea and the dry land. I will shake all nations. And then that author said, but you and I are being received into a kingdom that is unshakable. John's message is so similar to that. Okay. So similar to that. All right. These two beasts, the sea and the dry land, will not be overcome completely until the last days. They are dangerous to all earthlings, especially the holy ones of God, for they appear as divine powers and therefore deceive. The Lamb also was slain, but it has been restored to life. The earth beast has 2 horns, perhaps in parody of the lamb, but the lamb, remember, had 7 horns, we were told. In a general way, the beast disclosed religious dimensions of the Roman Empire, which John sees as an evil empire. And when he calls Babylon the great whore, is what he calls her, he's talking about Rome. Babylon hasn't been a great power for several hundred years. He's talking about Rome, without a doubt. And Nero is dead by the time John writes, but guess what? There were all kinds of rumors about where Nero really was. They didn't have CNN. They didn't have all the Fox News and stuff. They didn't have Geraldo out there scrounging around. So, with stories of sightings of Elvis after he died, of John Kennedy didn't really die, the Kennedys whisked him off to some desert island because his face was scarred badly. All those idiotic stories that go around. Guess what they were like when there were no newspapers and no radio and no television? There were some who said Nero had left Rome because of all the pressure from the burning of the city. He thought if he could burn down the old Rome, people would forget those glorious names like Julian Caesar and Augustus and others, and worship fall down to the new builder of Rome, the builder of the new Rome. But he was wrong. The people were so angry and threatening to kill him, and supposedly Nero took his own life. But there were stories that the pressure on him was enormous, so he just was whisked away out of town, and that he would come back at the head of a great army. John is concerned about that future war, and so the 666. But Nero fits perfectly with the numbers ascribed to letters in the Greek alphabet. Okay, just a brief intro here into chapter 14. Chapter 14 consists of 3 more visions and 7 scenes within those. And if you're feeling a little overwhelmed and can't keep up with all these, it's all right. Remember, he wrote this knowing that people are going to be gathered in households and somebody's going to stand up and read this whole thing, and the people are going to go home that night and think they got it. So he's trying for a general impression here. A general impression that people who had not had nearly the benefit of education you and I've had could hear this read and go home that night and believe we had understood what John was trying to say. Okay, let's start with chapter 14. Then I looked, and there was the Lamb standing on Mount Zion. Now, obviously, John cannot see Mount Zion from where he is. This is still a vision. Okay? He's in a cave on Patmos. Mount Zion is way over here. Okay, all of Turkey, the southernmost part of Turkey, lies between him and Mount Zion, and it certainly wasn't a big enough hill he could see it from there. He's talking about a vision here, a vision. And with the Lamb were 144,000 who had his name and his Father's name written on their foreheads. They were clearly marked as to whom they belonged. Okay, Dr. Thompson says the Lamb was last mentioned in chapter 7. We haven't heard directly from the Lamb now since chapter 7. The 144,000 were described back in that vision in chapter 7. We already know about that number. It's 12 times 12, 12 tribes of Israel, 12 sons of Jacob, times the biggest number he had. The biggest number he had in his arsenal was 1,000. 1 and 3 zeros. 12 times 12 times the biggest number he had. Mount Zion, by name, is mentioned only here in the book of Revelation. It is the place to which Israel returned after the exile, and where people dwell to escape the terrible day of the Lord in Isaiah 24, Joel chapter 2, 2 Esdras chapter 13. Mount Zion is also the place where the king was always enthroned. As Psalm 2 says, I have set my king on Zion, my holy hill. Mount Zion here, for John, refers to a place in heaven with the 144,000 in the heavenly temple. And the 144,000 have the name of the Lamb and His Father's name written on their foreheads, in contrast to those in the previous scene who have on their foreheads the name of the beast. So throughout Revelation, the forehead is a favorite place to make a mark on the body to indicate one's identity and one's owner. To whom does one belong? And I remind you that if you are in New York, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, some parts of Miami, where you see Hasidim, sometimes you see these Hasidic Jews with a little box wrapped around the head, right on the forehead. And they are the ones who take literally the Torah that says, my word shall be right before your eyes. And you're going out and you're coming in. My word should be right before your eyes. And in that little box is the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord, our God. Okay? The Eye, Asher Eye, our Elohim, is the only one you shall worship. You shall worship Him with all your heart and mind and soul and strength. On every Jewish household in Israel, even on the door facings of the Jerusalem Hilton, little tiny tubes screwed to the wall, and in that little tube, a little tiny scroll with the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, He is one. You must have no other God but Him, and so on. So those who take things literally have the little box right there, so they can never forget. Never forget. And on Ash Wednesday, we sort of emulate that with the ashes, where right there, right between the eyes, a clergy saying to you, from dust you came, and to dust you shall return. Okay? The mark right between the eyes, reminding you who you are. So there's some who bear the tattoos and the marks of the beast, and there are others who bear the mark of the Lamb. And most scholars believe that was baptism, of course. For these Gentile Christians, that was baptism. Okay, we better stop there. We did a lot today. Chapter 12 and 13, first verse of chapter 14. So, Virginia, you ladies help me here. We'll mark chapter 14, verse 2. If you haven't been to church, don't rush off. We're going to give third graders their Bibles, and that's just part of the service. Betsy's going to sing to you, O Divine Redeemer.